In this video, we will cover the main issues or the main points that already we covered or looked at in chapter 4 motivation. Firstly, I am going to give you some questions without any answer and try to come up with the correct answer or to find out the correct answer or even guess the correct answer. And then I am going to get back again to the questions and try to help you to find out the correct answer by checking slides that already we discussed. Now, our questions are: put true or false, the first type of question. Put true or false and correct the false statement. Number one, motivation is an internal state. Motivation is an internal state. Number two, motivation activates behavior. Motivation activates behavior. Motivation gives our behaviors direction. Motivation gives our behaviors direction. Motivation is the driving force behind all our actions. Motivation is the driving force behind all our actions. Extrinsic motivation refers to motivation that comes from within the individual. Extrinsic motivation refers to motivation that comes from within the individual. Extrinsic motivation occurs when people are internally motivated to do. Extrinsic motivation occurs when people are internally motivated to do. If the performance brings pleasure, this is sort of intrinsic motivation. If the performance brings pleasure, this is sort of intrinsic motivation. Motivation could be seen as the cause of behavior. Motivation could be seen as the cause of behavior. Motivation is a set of attitudes and values that influence a person to act in a specific goal-directed manner. Motivation is a set of attitudes and values that influence a person to act in a specific goal-directed manner. Motivation is a process of arousing and sustaining a goal-directed behavior. Motivation is a process of arousing and sustaining a goal-directed behavior. The goal-directed behavior induced by the expectation of satisfying individual needs. The goal-directed behavior induced by the expectation of satisfying individual needs. The motivation process is a circular dimension, starts with an unsatisfied need and ends with new and unsatisfied need. The motivation process is a circular dimension, starts with an unsatisfied need and ends with new unsatisfied need. Motivation can steer an individual's behavior towards or away from a particular objective. Motivation can steer an individual's behavior towards or away from particular object. Motivation has a directing or steering function. Motivation has a directing or steering function. Motivation has an activating function that energizes our action to achieve the goals. Motivation has an activating function that energizes action to achieve the goals. Motivation has a control function that influence behavior. Motivation has a control function that influence behavior. Intrinsic motivation comes from outside of the individual. Intrinsic motivation comes from outside of the individual. Extrinsic motivation involves rewards like money and grades. Extrinsic motivation involve rewards like money and grades. Coercion and the threat of punishment are considered as intrinsic motivations. Coercion and the threat of punishment are considered as intrinsic motivations. Competition is intrinsic motivation. Competition is intrinsic motivation. Competition encourages the performer to win and beat others, not to enjoy the intrinsic rewards of the activity. Competition encourages the performer to win and beat others, not to enjoy the intrinsic rewards of the activity. A crowded cheering on the individual and the trophies are extrinsic incentives. A crowd cheering on the individual and the trophies are extrinsic incentives. Motivation plays an important role in determining whether a company will succeed or not. Motivation plays an important role in determining whether a company will succeed or not. We can achieve the goals of the organization through influencing and changing the workers' inner drives. We can achieve the goals of the organization through influencing and changing the workers' inner drives. If the need is of social origin, it is called a motive. If the need is of social origin, it is called a motive. If the need is of psychological origin, it is called a desire. If the need is of psychological origin, it is called a desire. If the need is of social origin, it is called a desire or drive. The need for curiosity is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for curiosity is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for competence is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for competence is an example of extrinsic social motives. Influencing and changing the workers' inner drives may change or increase their performance in a way helping in achieving the goals of the organization. Influencing and changing the workers' inner drives may change or increase their performance in a way helping in achieving the goals of the organization. If the people do behavior that they believe or think it is important, this is some sort of extrinsic motivation. If the people do behavior that they believe or think it is important, this is some sort of extrinsic motivation. A need is something that is necessary for organisms to live a healthy life. A need is something that is necessary for organisms to live a healthy life. A want is something that is necessary for organisms to live a healthy life. A want is something that is necessary for organisms to live a healthy life. Needs can be objective and physical, such as need for self-esteem. Needs can be objective and physical, such as the need for self-esteem. Please don't forget to write down your answers and then check it when I give you the correct answer. Needs can be subjective and psychological, such as the need for food and water. Needs can be subjective and psychological, such as the need for food and water. If the need is of social base, we call that drive. If the need is of social base, we call that drive. If the need expresses a body need, it is called an incentive. If the need expresses a body need, it is called an incentive. The body needs for food, air, water, rest, warmth, and sexual relief are the most common motives. The body needs for food, air, water, rest, warmth, and sexual relief are the most common motives. If the need is of psychological origin, it is called a drive. If the need is of psychological origin, it is called a drive. The need for achievement is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The need for achievement is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The need for affiliation is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for affiliation is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for attention is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The need for attention is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The need for approval is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for approval is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for dominance is an example of extrinsic psychological motives. The need for dominance is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for independence is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The need for independence is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. The grade in the case of need for achievement is referred to as motive. The grades in the case of need for achievement is referred to as motive. The need for achievement is referred to as motive. The need for achievement is referred to as motive. The need for water is referred to as drive. The need for water is referred to as drive. The need for achievement is referred to as desire. The need for achievement is referred to as desire. The food and the need for food is referred to as drive. The food and the need for food is referred to as drive. The need for food is referred to as drive. The need for food is referred to as drive. To be respected by others is the incentive in the case of self-esteem. To be respected by others is the incentive in the case of self-esteem. The self-esteem need is considered as incentive. Now, a different type of question. Choose the correct answer. Choose the correct answer. The need for curiosity is an example of extrinsic, intrinsic, lower social motives. The need for competence is an example of social, psychological, physiological motives. The need for achievement is an example of social, psychological, physiological, intrinsic motives. The need for affiliation is an example of extrinsic, social, psychological, physiological motives. The need for attention is an example of social, physiological, psychological, intrinsic motives. The need for approval is an example of extrinsic, social, physiological, psychological motive. The need for dominance is an example of intrinsic, extrinsic, physiological, social motives. The need for independence is an example of psychological, extrinsic, intrinsic, physiological motives. A need, drive, motive is something that is necessary for organisms to live a healthy life. Needs can be objective and physical, psychological, or social, such as food and water. Needs can be subjective and psychological, social, physiological, such as need for self-esteem. Now get back to our questions and try to find the correct answer for each one by checking slides related to each question. Question number one, motivation is an internal state. What do you think? Motivation is an internal state. Now go and check this slide. This is the two definitions we looked at regarding motivation. The definition number one says motivation is an internal state. So it's true. Motivation activates behavior. Now get back to the same slide. Motivation is an internal state that activates behavior and gives it direction. So activates and gives it direction. And the motivation is the driving force behind all actions of human beings, animals, and even lower organisms. Motivation activates behavior? Yes, correct. True. Motivation gives our behavior directions? Yes, true. Motivation is the driving force behind all our action? Yes, true. Now, extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation refers to motivation that comes from within the individual. And the second question says extrinsic motivation occurs when people are internally motivated. Please look at this slide. In this slide, we differentiated between two types of motivation. The first one referred to as intrinsic motivation, and the second one is extrinsic motivation. And already we have defined intrinsic motivation as it refers to motivation that comes from within the individual instead of from outside. While the extrinsic motivation, it comes from outside the individual of the individual. And regarding intrinsic motivation, as we said, it occurs when you are internally motivated, not externally motivated. You are not inspired by external factors, but you are inspired by internal factors, such as you do the behavior because you believe that because this behavior will bring you pleasure, or you feel that it is important or significant, or it is important to do. But if you are talking about extrinsic motivation, we have common extrinsic motivations such as trophies, such as rewards, like money, grades, coercion, threat of punishment, crowd cheering, trophies, competition, even competition, we consider that extrinsic motivation, because in competition you are not interested in how to enjoy the behavior itself, but we are interested in how to win and beat others. So extrinsic motivation refers to motivation that comes from within the individual. No, sure, no, because extrinsic motivation comes from outside the individual. Extrinsic motivation occurs when people are internally motivated. No, extrinsic motivation occurs when people are externally motivated or inspired by external factors. If the performance brings pleasure, this is sort of intrinsic motivation. Yes, sure. Motivation could be seen as the cause of behavior. Yes, as we said while trying to define motivation, we said it is the cause of behavior. Motivation is a set of attitudes and values that influence a person to act in a specific goal-directed manner. Yes, because this is the definition of goal-directed behavior. Check this slide. This is the definition of goal-directed behavior. And as we said before, motivation is a set of attitudes and values that influence a person to act in a specific goal-directed manner. Motivation is a process of arousing and sustaining a goal-directed behavior. This is, yes, this is the second definition of motivation. Check this slide. This is the second definition. Motivation is a process of arousing and sustaining a goal-directed behavior induced by the expectation of Satisfying individual needs and the motivation process is a circular dimension, starts with unsatisfied need and ends with new unsatisfied need. The goal-directed behavior induced by the expectation of satisfying individual needs. Yes, as we said before, you will not be motivated if you cannot expect that you can get your goal and satisfy your needs. If you are not able to expect that, you will not be, never ever, you will not be satisfied. The motivation process is a circular dimension, starts with an unsatisfied need and ends with new unsatisfied. Yes. Motivation can steer an individual's behavior towards or away from particular objective. Yes, and this one of the three functions of motivation. Check this slide. This is the functions of these are the functions of motivation. Number one, a direct or steering function. Number two, activating function. Number two, a control. Number three, a control function. Motivation has a directing or steering function. Yes, because this is one of the three functions. Motivation has an activating function that energizes action to achieve the goal. Yes. Motivation has a control function that influence behavior. Sure. And all of these are the functions of motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from outside of the individual. No, it comes from within the individual, or we can say extrinsic motivation comes from outside. Either we can say intrinsic motivation comes from within the individual or inside the individual, or we can say extrinsic motivation comes from outside of the individual. Extrinsic motivation involve rewards like money and grades, sure. And this is the most common extrinsic motivations. Coercion and the threat of punishment are considered intrinsic motivation. No, they are considered as extrinsic motivation. Competition is intrinsic motivation. No, competition is extrinsic motivation. Competition encourages the performer to win and beat others, not to enjoy the intrinsic rewards of the activity. Yes, because in competition, just you are interested in how to beat others, not to enjoy the behavior itself. A crowd cheering on the individual and the trophies are extrinsic incentive. Yes, these are extrinsic motivation, so we can consider them extrinsic incentives. Motivation plays an important role in determining whether a company will succeed or not. Yes, please check this slide. This is a slide about the functions of motivation in organization. And in the first point, as we said before, in today's organization, motivation plays an important role in determining whether a company will succeed or not. We can achieve the goals of the organizations. We can achieve the goals of the organization through influencing and changing the inner drives of the workers or the workers' inner drives. Yes. Again, get back to this slide. And as we said before, you can influence the you can influence and change their inner drives, I mean, workers or employees, which may change or increase their performance in a way helping in achieving the goals of the organization. If the need is of social origin, it is called a motive. Yes. Now we check the definition of motive. This is the definition of motive. If the need is of psychological or social origin, it's called motive or desire. So we can it motive or desire. And we have some psychological intrinsic motives such as need for competence, need for curiosity, for achievement. And we have extrinsic such as need for affiliation, attention, approval, dominance, and independence. Remember this slide because we have a lot of questions, their answer included here. If the need is of psychological origin, it is called a desire, yes, called a desire or motive. If the need of social origin is called a desire or drive, no, yes, desire, but no, not drive. So it is incorrect. And if we can say if the need is of social origin is called a desire or motive. The need for curiosity is an example of extrinsic social motives. No, as we said before, you remember the slides that I mentioned before that you have to take it into account and remember it carefully. The need for curiosity is intrinsic psychological motives. The need for competence is an example of extrinsic social motive. Competence, no, it is intrinsic psychological motive. Influencing and changing the workers' employees' inner drives. Our employees' inner drives may change or increase their performance in a way helping in achieving the goals of organization. Yes. If the people do behavior that they believe or think it is important, this is some sort of extrinsic motivation. No, it is intrinsic motivation. A need is something that is necessary for organism to live a healthy life. Yes, this is the definition of the need, and check this slide. A want is something that is necessary. No, this is the definition of need. Needs can be objective and physical, such as the need for self-esteem. No, such as need for water, for food, for air, for warmth. Or we can say needs can be needs can be objective and physical, such as the need for food. Or we can say needs can be subjective and psychological, such as need for self-esteem. Needs can be subjective and psychological, such as the need for food. No, we have to change this with self-esteem. Or we can say can be objective and physical, such as need for water. If the need of social peace, we call that drive. No, it is referred to as motive or desire. If the need expresses a body need, it is called an incentive. No, this is the definition of drive. Check the definition of drive. If the need is of physiological origin, we call that drive. If it is expresses a body need, it is called a drive. The body needs for food, for water, rest, warmth, sexual relief are the most common drives. The body needs for food, water, rest, warmth, sexual are the most common motive? No, are the most common drives. If the need is of psychological origin, it's called a drive? No, it is called a desire or motive. The need for achievement is an example of psychological intrinsic motive. Do you remember this slide? Need for achievement is psychological intrinsic motive. The need for achievement is an example of psychological intrinsic motive. Yes, true. The need for affiliation is an example of extrinsic social motives. Yes. The need for attention is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. No, it is extrinsic social. The need for approval is an example of extrinsic social motive. Yes. The need for dominance is an example of extrinsic psychological motives. Dominance, extrinsic psychological, no, it is extrinsic false, and it is extrinsic social. So we have it change this word, replace this with social. The need for independence is an example of psychological intrinsic motives. No, it is social acceptance. Now check again this slide and you will find the answers all this package of questions. Psychological intrinsic, curiosity, competence, achievement, extrinsic social affiliation, attention, approval, dominance, independence. The grades in the case of need for achievement is referred to as motive. No, the grades is the external thing that we seek to obtain it to satisfy the need for achievement. So the grades is referred to as incentive. And you have to replace the word motive with the word incentive. Go and check, please, the definition of incentive. This is the definition of incentive. We are not talking about the need itself, but we are talking about the external thing. If you would be able to get it or obtain it, you will relieve tension, reduce tension, and satisfy your need. And it is also referred to as a reinforcer or goal. The need for achievement is referred to as motive. Yes, it is motive. The need for water is referred to as drive. Yes, it is drive. The need for achievement is referred to as desire. Yes, motive or desire. The food and the need for food is referred to as drive. No, the need for food is a drive, but the food itself is incentive. So we have to replace the word drive with the word incentive. The need for food is referred to as drive. Yes. To be respected by others is the incentive in the case of self-esteem need, yes. And as we said regarding self-esteem in the hierarchy of needs, and in the fourth layer, we found the self-esteem needs. And as we said before, it could be classified into two subcategories. The first one, or the lower than the lower one, is to be respected by others, fame, prestige, recognition, and so on. But the higher level is to respect yourself or to have some self-confidence. And for sure, to be respected in that case is the incentive that if we would be able to gain it, to get it, we will satisfy the self-esteem need. The self-esteem need is considered as incentive. No, it is considered as motive or desire. This is true and this is false. Now choose the correct answer. The need for curiosity is an example of need for curiosity is an, check this slide, please. Need for curiosity is psychological intrinsic motive. Curiosity, intrinsic psychological motive. Sorry, so this psychology. And the correct answer will be intrinsic. The need for competence is an example of psychological motive. The need for achievement is an example of psychological intrinsic motive. The need for affiliation is an example of extrinsic social. The need for attention is an example of social. No, this is extrinsic. The need for approval is an example of extrinsic, for approval, extrinsic social. The need for dominance is an example of extrinsic social motives. The need for independence is an example of independence. Independence is extrinsic social. Need for an example of social, sorry, social extrinsic. A need or drive or motive is something that is necessary for sure. It is need. Needs can be objective and physical. Needs can be subjective and psychological, such as the need for self-esteem. Now you have to mark your answers and give yourself a grade. Thank you so much.